I'm certain many of you already know this, but IDW currently employs one of the most destructive editors in all of comic books. Her name's Heather Antos, and I don't believe there's another major publisher. When I say major, I'm talking about Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, Dark Horse, and Boom Studios. I guess those would be the six. Any of those publishers that's hired anyone as incompetent as Heather Antos and actually put her into like a senior leadership position. She's the group editor or senior editor in charge of all licensed products, basically at IDW, other than TMNT. That was pretty smart. You don't want to give her the TMNT. That's the real franchise that can actually make money. But this week, IDW doubled down on stupid, and they actually went out and hired a worse editor for a position even more important than what Heather Antos is doing, the TMNT group editor. And you're like, Wes, that's impossible. There can't be another editor that's more destructive than Heather Antos. Listen, Heather Antos is a fucking train wreck. Everything she touches turns to shit. But she's never done anything quite as stupid as Andy Khouri. She never broke Vertigo. She never did anything quite that dumb because DC Comics were too smart to actually promote her up there. But they did promote Andy Khouri to that position. And let's talk about these new hirings at IDW. IDW Publishing has announced two new hires. Former TMNT group editor Bobby Curnow is returning after a 2-year absence to a new role as editor-in-chief, and Andy Khouri is joining the company as senior editor for TMNT titles. Curnow spent 12 years at IDW from 2010 to 2022 before leaving for Magma Comics to serve as editor-in-chief, and we've kind of already covered that one there. And he's like a big get if you're IDW. And yeah, he was the guy that was in charge of TMNT when The Last Ronin came out, and that was certainly very, very successful. But he was also the guy in charge of TMNT that hired Sophie Campbell to be the new writer on TMNT. But I would say that was highly unsuccessful. Which one do you weigh heavier? The tremendous success of Last Ronin or the tremendous not success of Sophie Campbell and turning mutants into a trans allegory? I would say the Last Ronin probably hinged more on Kevin Eastman and Tom Waltz, who had been working on TMNT a long time, and a concept that had been developed, I think, in the 80s or 90s that actually worked out and that people are excited for, more than Curnow's fingerprints being on the Sophie Campbell stuff. I blame him more for that. How's that? I think he deserves less credit for The Last Ronin than he deserves credit for the Sophie Campbell, Jenica fucking thing that happened. So he's in as the new editor-in-chief. He's going to be in charge of the creative direction of IDW. That could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Good things happen under his watch. Terrible things also happen under his watch. But the coup de grace is the other name that was in there that I've already mentioned. Andy Khouri was an editor at DC for 5 years, where he co-founded the Black Label imprint and worked on the Eisner Award-winning Wonder Woman Historia, as well as Far Sector, the Omega Men, The End Is Here, and the Young Animal and Wonder Comics imprints. Prior to that, he was editor-in-chief of Comics Alliance, which won a 2015 Eisner Award for Best Comics-Related Periodical Journalism. I should have said /journalism, but I'll say journalism because there was a slash in the article. And that's where you know Andy Khouri from. He's the guy that started at Comics Alliance. And if you know what Comics Alliance is, they're basically ground zero for all the stuff that's destroying Marvel and DC and has been doing so for about 8 to 10 years now. All those ideas started at Comics Alliance. And now all these people like Andy Khouri and an Andrew Wheeler and a David Brothers, they no longer obviously work at Comics Alliance because that doesn't exist anymore. And they didn't go work for like the Comics Beat. They didn't go work for Bleeding Cool. They didn't work for CBR. Now they work for the publishers. They actually weasel their way in as editors on large scale projects and stuff like that. And they basically have destroyed comic books from the inside. And Andy Khouri is definitely one of those people. How did that Wonder comic imprint go when they launched that out in the very first issue of like Wonder Twins? Had like the Wonder Twins teaching of Earth children about like fucking orgies and stuff like that. It was some weird shit because that guy's an idiot. He's also the guy that was in charge or put in charge basically of the Vertigo line. Remember, they were going to do the celebration of Vertigo comics, 40 years of Vertigo. We're going to restart the line, reinvest in it. Within 3 months, they had 3 major scandals under Andy Khouri, and basically Vertigo was shut down. I believe we will see it again because I do believe there's money to be made in Vertigo, but they can't do anything with it because Andy Khouri turned it into his own personal SJW comic book line and basically made everything cool about Vertigo never cool again. That's why we don't have Vertigo comic books anymore, because this guy was an idiot. And now leave it up to IDW to actually go out and pluck this guy. It hasn't had a job, as far as I can tell, in like 3 years since DC Comics had those mass firings. Remember when all that stuff happened? Andy Khouri was one of the very first people to go because he was that fucking expendable. He had cost them that much money. Now, that doesn't mean he's a bad guy, and I imagine if you go have a beer with him, he's fun and he's nice and all that stuff. But on a professional level, he's insidious. He comes to the table with an agenda. You can go look at his stuff that's still up from Comics Alliance, and you can see what Andy Khouri is all about. And he's the one that destroyed something with a legacy so enormous like Vertigo. That's how incompetent this man is. But of course, there is one person out there with an eye for talent like this. His name is IDW CEO and publisher Davide Jonas, and this is what he had to say. Already in his first weeks at IDW, Andy has demonstrated a dynamic ability to think big and also be attentive to detail. Andy has a calm and friendly nature that invites creativity and partnership. Man, it's a good thing IDW CEO Davide Jonas named himself the publisher, or how else would they be able to go out there and hire these real professionals like an Andy Khouri, people that are so incompetent they actually destroy lines, people whose Rolodex is so full of toxic creators you can actually destroy things within a matter of months. We're talking Vertigo lasted for 40 years. This dude was on it. Within 3 months, they had to shut everything down. The only thing that really lasted after that was the Sandman Universe stuff, which they put under Black Label. And of course, Black Label ended up being whatever it is Black Label is. What is Black Label? What was Black Label? Nobody even knows that, but I guess that's his claim to fame. But he had the Young Animal comic books that nobody paid attention to. Far Sector obviously got some awards or whatever, but nobody read it. Of course, they did get an Eisner for Wonder Woman Historia from Kelly Sue DeConnick. I've read the book. I don't know why that happened. It's pretty fucking unreadable. And the art, even itself, by Phil Jimenez, who's absolutely amazing, is over-rendered and very hard to decipher. So I don't know anything that's actually been good that this guy's been associated with, but I imagine his name's on something good, right? Heather Antos' name is on Vader Down. I believe is one of the editors on there. So I'm sure he can claim a few things, but I don't think anything that was in that article is something to be proud of. And I do think IDW are making an enormous mistake giving away the franchise, handing their most valuable, popular, and important IP over to a bumbling idiot that only knows how to destroy things. They overpaid out the ass for TMNT and to retain the comic book licensing rights. And to hand it to somebody like this is really, really bad. It's not just that he's incompetent. It's not that he just can't run a comic book line. It's not that he has a Rolodex full of bad creators that don't know how to write comic books. It's also how he treats people. This is something that went down in 2019. The then DC Comics editor took to Twitter to insinuate that comic book readers and fans are villains writing what people actually mean when they say they want non-political comics, like when they were kids, is that they're devastated to have woken up one day as an adult, read a comic book, and realize they grew up to become the kind of person their childhood hero punches in the face. And that's who Andy Khouri is. Does that seem very familiar to another employer in IDW? Someone that literally goes out of their way to piss off and alienate their fans? Heather Antos used to do shit like that all the time at Marvel Comics. She got fired. Andy Khouri would do the same shit at DC. He got fired. And for some reason, IDW are dumb enough to go out there and hire these people. And they deserve everything that they get. When they go out of business, which I don't want to see happen. I want to see publishers thriving and I want to see things going well. But when they go out of business, they will have nobody but themselves to blame because they kept going out of their way to hire the most incompetent people out there. Do you remember this? Sean Gordon Murphy, working at DC Comics at the time, I think it was Chris Arant, put out a tweet, was like, hey, what's something that you would like regarding support from your publisher that you don't think you're getting right now? And I don't remember the exact details, and I don't have the tweet memorized, but Sean was like, hey, you know, I would really like competent editors that had written stories in the past and were familiar and comfortable with the 3-act structure, you know, that really knew how to write good comic book stories. And Andy Khouri, of course, was the most prominent editor out there to take great umbrage with what Sean Gordon Murphy was like. Hey, I'm just here to spell check, dude. I drink my coffee just like my contract stated. I'm not supposed to understand how stories are written. I'm not here to support you and help you create the best story possible. That's just too much. It feels like you're hitting a little too close to home, dude, was the way that he basically reacted to that, because he was never really, truthfully, qualified for the position of a comic book editor. He wrote comic book articles for Comics Alliance. He didn't actually edit comic books, much in the same way that Heather Antos was never really qualified to be hired at Marvel in the first place. She had edited some friend's crowdfunding book and said that was her resume, and they hired her and put her on fucking Star Wars. But this is like the process out there. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be knowledgeable. You don't have to be competent in anything that the job requires. You just have to have relationships. And obviously, Heather Antos developed a relationship with Jordan White at Marvel Comics on the con scene, got her way in, weaseled her way into Marvel Comics, and Andy Khouri, being a shill, carrying water and trying to influence comic books back in the day, obviously made some type of relationships at DC Comics and got his foot in the door, and it ended up blowing up in their faces, and he destroyed a franchise. Will that happen again? I fucking think it will. That's how dumb this guy is. This is the type of ineptitude that IDW have put into their offices. These are the type of people that are leading major projects. These are two of probably your 5 most senior people involved with comic books in the entire company at this point. You know, you got the publisher, Jonas, you got your EIC, Bobby Curnow, you got your TMNT senior editor, Andy Khouri, you got your other editor, senior editor in charge of licensed products, Heather Antos. These are some of the biggest names with the most power at the company, and they are the biggest imbeciles. And that's what's going on here. And if you don't believe me, I've got a couple of videos that I do want to offer to you to explain to you what Comics Alliance are and what Andy Khouri did at Vertigo. First up, if you haven't seen this one, this breaks down what Comics Alliance was, all the stuff that he did, and all the people that ended up infiltrating the comic book industry right here. Then after that, watch this video. Basically breaks down how Andy Khouri destroyed Vertigo and all the controversies he courted within a mere 3 months as the editor of Vertigo as well.